Hello, everybody. My name is Carla, and I'm here to share with you my YouTube playlist on California culture. The playlist that I have created tells a very dark side of our history, but I think it's a very important part of history that we need to share. For one reason is so that we don't repeat it, so that we can understand the struggles of the people who have been through this, and so that we can change future generations' concepts of how we as a society villainize people and create stigmas in society. My first video is called Telling the Truth About California Missions, and this is the story of indigenous people who were here before it was colonized. And it tells the story of how they were treated by the missionaries when they were here building the missions. They were not they were not working as part of a team. They were treated like slaves. They were not fed properly. They were not treated as human beings. You would have this preconception that because these are people who are Christians, who are men of God, that they would treat all human beings as they were part of God's family. But that's not true. In this story, you will find out that sometimes there wasn't even enough food to feed them correctly. And a lot of them were starving and got sick and they died. And I think it's important that that whole visualization that we have been raised learning that Native Americans and colonists lived in harmony. It's not true. My second video is called The Reckoning: Native American Boarding Schools. This is something I learned when I was in college, and I was shocked. And as a parent, I could not imagine a government making a law that allowed basically henchmen to come in, take my child away from me, and put them hundreds of miles away, cut their hair, give them clothes, give them new names, give them a new religion, strip them of everything that I've taught them or everything that has to do with my culture, because they believe that to kill the Indian, they would save the man. When in fact, during this process, most of the children died in these boarding schools of disease or disease, and a lot of times because of the food that they were feeding them, their bodies could not handle. My third video is on the Bracero program. Bracero program happened in World War II, where the U.S. government needed workers. They needed cheap labor, so they made an agreement with Mexico to bring these men over, pay them fair wages, so that they could also have a better life, only to find out that not all of them were treated fairly. They were not paid a fair wage. Sometimes they were even given their basic needs. It was another way of exploiting labor so that America could be built and sustained without having to it's another way that America got away with using people of color to create and sustain their country, economic system. The fourth video is the story of Chinese immigrants who came here during the gold rush. And unfortunately, the stigma was always, they called them the yellow people. And they were villainized in a lot of ways for being, they want to take over the world. They're always trying to take everything from everybody. And this is a story when they started to immigrate here during the gold rush. And when they were mining, a lot of the white miners would become violent with them, steal from them. It wasn't a very harmonious place for them to be. You know, I saw a few instances during COVID, unfortunately, where a lot of people were being very hostile to Chinese Americans, telling them to go home. So I think it's important for us to know and hear the stories of all immigrants who come here and are not treated well. So the next 5 videos are dedicated to the African American community. We all know that slavery existed in America. We have never sugarcoated it. I think a lot of times they played it down in history as to not scare children. My first video is on the life of a slave on a cotton plantation. Life of a slave was work, 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 work. They were not seen as human beings. As a matter of fact, if you look back into the Constitution, there was a time when they were actually only considered 3/5 of a person. And the reason being is they did not want them to have the ability to have any type of political representation. If they counted as a full person, then they would be required to have representation. So they were considered 3/5 of a person. They were sold at auctions like cattle. When they didn't like the way they behaved, or they ran off, or they did anything against their masters, they were whipped like an animal. Many of the slave owners raped their female slaves and had children with them. And the children were also sold off as slaves. On my next slide, we talk about the civil rights movement. You can only oppress a people for so long. Fortunately, slavery was abolished by Abraham Lincoln. But even after slavery was abolished, they were still segregated. They were still treated as second-class citizens. They may have now become a whole person, but they were still not equal. one of one of the leaders in the civil rights movement, one of the most influential ones, is Martin Luther King Jr. And he marched on Washington, and they eventually assassinated him for his attempts for equality. But even to this day, his memory lives on, and they're still fighting for that same equality. The next two videos, remembering the 1992 LA riots and then Black Lives Matter protesters, these two I put in because I think it's an important topic for us to talk about. Everybody sees them protesting and they break out in riots, and there's looting and there's fires and there's police and there's all of this commotion going. And because all of this commotion is going, nobody ever understands or gets to the point of what's going on. And the point of what's going on, in 1992, there were 3 police officers that beat a man named Rodney King. And they went to court for excessive force, and they were acquitted of all charges. After that beating, there were several more. There have been several beatings, several deaths at the hands of police officers. And then in 2020, when the Black Lives Matter movement began, or continued, I should say, George Floyd was murdered at the hands of police officers. And it was witnessed by millions of people because of our ability to record on our phones. What people don't seem to understand, when these riots, these protests, when they break out, it's a cry because the injustices just do not stop. When is it going to stop? When are they going to stop murdering people of color without any consequences? When are they going to be just as important as a person with white skin? If you oppress the people for long enough, of course, they're going to fight back. They're going to cry. They're going to act out because they want that justice. If you look at the Ferguson report, you will see how deeply rooted institutional racism is. And until we acknowledge that, we cannot fix it. The next video is an interview with Ava DuVernay. She is director of the documentary 13, which deals with mass incarceration. And if you go into the movie at about 54 minutes, you will see where politicians who are tough on crime have consistently added to the mass incarceration of people of color. And it continues. 1 in 4 people of color, African American men, are in prison. 1 in 17 white men are in prison. Why are there such huge gaps in the numbers of people of color in prison as opposed to white people? There's something going on in our system, something that needs to be changed. The last 2 videos on this are very close to me because I am a woman and I am a Latina. The dark history of forced sterilization. This comes at us during the time of eugenics. Eugenics was a science that was basically made up of people's stigmas on people of color. Oh, they're poor, so they shouldn't have children. If they have children, they're going to be degenerates. So they would forcibly sterilize women in prisons or in state hospitals so they couldn't have kids because they didn't want them reproducing and having these deviant children in society. And the last video has to do with the battle for reproductive rights for women, period. Roe v. Wade was overturned not that long ago. And in doing so, I feel that the government has told me what I can and cannot do with my uterus. And women all over the country don't have a say in their own bodies and their own health care anymore. And if slavery was abolished and you can't own a person, I'd like to know how you can own my uterus. I hope that each of these can teach you something, speak to you, inspire you, or educate you in a way that makes you want to change the world, even if it's just one person at a time. Thank you.